All right, everyone, we are back again at the Brand Innovators Retail and Commerce Summit. We're backstage with Matt Repicky.
That's right, Repicky.
Repicky, Chief Brand Officer at Taylor Brands.
That's right.
And you're here today actually with your fellow C-suiter, your CMO, Carolyn Pollock. So we're going to chat a little bit about retail, commerce, the industry. But first, can we get some clarification and understand how your roles and remits differ from the Chief Brand Officer to the Chief Marketing Officer?
Chief Marketing Officer, sure. Yeah, I actually started at Taylor Brands as the Chief Marketing Officer for Joseph A. Bank and then took on our wedding business. But about a year ago, as Carolyn and I were talking about how we wanted to structure the leadership of the marketing organization, one of the insights we had was that coming out of the pandemic, we needed to work on and rebuild brand equity across our portfolio. And so my role was created to really focus on brand strategy, creative strategy, customer insights, and our consumer comms so that we can reintroduce ourselves to customers. And so that's what my remit is. And then Carolyn also oversees our media, MarTech, so on and so forth, other parts of the org. But I'm hyper-focused on, tracking brand health and looking at what is the long-term, sort of pathway for each of the brands in our portfolio.
That's amazing, and definitely something that we're seeing a lot of in conversations with some of the leaders is maybe a renewed focus on some of that long-term brand building, right? Where maybe paying to reacquire your customers over and over again is not the most sound strategy, but if you build that long-term relationship, it's much more efficient. So I love to see it. So let's, I guess before we dive into the future, we're going to take a little bit of a retrospective.
Sure.
It's now almost 3 years since the onset of the pandemic, and retail as a category may be arguably one of the most impacted sectors and industries over the last few years. So I'm curious, what did you learn? And what's applicable for the future from what you've learned over the last few years?
Sure. Gosh, learned a lot. I think learned a lot as a marketer, learned a lot as a leader, managing teams, especially in the retail space, to your point, through a time by which all of our stores were closed for a number of months. People were transacting exclusively online. I think one of the learnings we had during that period was really, how do you dive into trends and insights on consumer behavior? And how do you use those insights in terms of the products that you're going to promote and put in front of customers differently than you might do when you have stores open? So I know that you were joking earlier, you don't buy suits online. A lot of people bought suits online, whether it's because they wanted to look good on Zoom for interviews or meetings, but they did it. And so I think staying attuned to insights, and it sounds sort of rudimentary, but staying connected to sort of what the consumer is telling you, I think, is one learning that's super important. Another learning is continuing to look at your media mix or your marketing investments. I think pushing on what might have worked yesterday to make sure it still works today and tomorrow. Again, during the pandemic, we were hyper-focused on what you would call sort of more lower funnel tactics. Let's make sure that we're driving revenue at a time when revenue generation was impacted. But like I mentioned, one of the reasons that my role was specifically created was because coming out of the pandemic, we saw that we'd lost the plot a little bit in terms of talking about our brand and building and maintaining brand equity. And so we looked differently at our messaging construct and the way that we're bringing the brand to life. And it's not just about price and promotion and sort of lower funnel attribution. It's really also about keeping our existing customers excited about the brand and what we represent for when they're ready to work with us, and then also towards customer acquisition.
That's fantastic, right? You got to have a mix of both, right? So that makes a lot of sense. So let's look forward now, right? So and it's a roller coaster ride because it's out of the pandemic, but into economic question marks and the conversations around recession and inflation and what that means both for the brand, but also for your consumers and their spending. So how have your tactics changed, or how are you adapting to those conversations?
Yeah, I think I would say there's a couple of ways that I'm looking at that. One is that, like I mentioned, during the pandemic, there was belt tightening. There was a lot of scrutiny towards the dollars that were being spent, and so I think we're really familiar with how to do that. And so I think as we look into economic uncertainty, it's going back to the playbook of let's make sure that we're qualifying why we're spending, what we're spending for and what we're spending against, and that it's meaningful to the business. So I think just keeping that in mind with the teams going forward. The other piece of it for our business specifically is that we're outfitting people for pretty important moments in their lives, weddings in particular. We saw during the pandemic, people still got married. They got married differently, but they still were getting married. And so I think it's showcasing to customers sort of the inspiration and the emotional connection of what we can offer for those big days to make sure that they're continuing to think about us, because presumably weddings are still going to continue even if there is, sort of economic uncertainty. And so we want to make sure that we're speaking to customers and letting them know the service, the quality, the value that we offer as we sort of course through that time.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think one thing that we saw certainly, right, is this emphasis on self-care or celebrating things that you might not otherwise celebrate. And I think there's almost a rebound, right, when economic uncertainties, or other things impact us. We want to spend more time celebrating those things, and it becomes that much more important to do so. So it's interesting. So, all right. So now let's go to some of the, I guess, a little bit of a lighter topic, right? Let's talk about trends. It's January 2023. Everybody's thinking about and talking about what's going to happen, and I'm sure 2024 will be here before we know it. But what's top of mind for you? Are there any interesting industry trends that are particularly, interesting to you as you're thinking about your plans for the year?
Yeah, I think I'll tackle that in two ways. One is let's talk about kind of cultural trends, and then we can talk about sort of as a core marketer, what are the things we're looking at? Because, I think what's important for me in my role and working with my teams is tapping into sort of the zeitgeist, if you will. We have perception opportunities with Men's Wearhouse and the rest of our brands on what people think about us versus, what they experience when they come into our stores or shop on our website. And so one of the ways that we continue to make inroads there is by showing up as, being culturally relevant. So, one of the areas that we're focusing on is inclusion and representation, and making sure that we're showcasing our talent and our campaigns in new and different ways that maybe are unexpected. Not what our customer would expect from us, I should say, but expected of them or by them from brands they work with. So, sort of that DE&I effort or lens is something that's hypercritical. The other is just really tacking into, again, what are people talking about out there and into the ether. So as an example, there's a continued 90s nostalgia that's taking place. People wearing 90s trends, listening to 90s music. The Men's Wearhouse prom campaign this year, we shot in a roller rink, we shot in a bowling alley. So we want to tap into and show our customers that we know what's exciting and important to them. So I think the cultural trend is something that I always want to keep a finger on and make sure that my teams are also looking at. From a marketing standpoint, I think one of the trends is really on continuing to push our mix. And so as I heard folks and panelists talking about today, it's don't be complacent with, again, something that worked yesterday is going to continue to work, and people are trying new things. And so I was just speaking with some peers around, should we look and try out of home? Is terrestrial radio a place that we can be hyper localized? And so I think, again, from a marketer standpoint, a trend as we go into 2023 is sort of that refresh and renew on what our mix is, and testing through again, new ways to get in front of our customer.
I love it. And I mean, you talked about being in culture and 90s. First of all, I was born in the 80s, but I'm a child of the 90s.
Okay, sure.
So that resonates personally. But even cultural relevance itself is, I think, something that is so important and so elusive and hard to capture.
Sure.
So, and certainly, right, something we talk about, it's interesting because you bring it up with regard to your media mix and where you are. What worked yesterday doesn't necessarily work today. And when we talk to our marketers in our community about talent, one of the big things, recurring themes that arises is self-education, because what you did yesterday, what you were an expert in yesterday, may not be you may not be an expert in tomorrow, right?
Totally.
So it's kind of this industry moves really fast. So that agility, I think that ability to just pivot and try new things is key.
Yeah, no, for sure. We were just, last year we advertised prom for Men's Wearhouse on Twitch for the first time. Again, felt it was important to get in front of that audience. We saw it work really well, but also we felt like there were learnings coming out of it. And so this year, as we go in our prom campaign, we're reinvesting with Twitch, but we're doing it through Twitch influencers and not direct advertising. And so again, it's sort of like let's make sure that and again, that was learning to your point, like we hadn't done it before. We felt like it was a place to go, but we had to sort of learn as we went. And now we're taking those learnings and applying them to what our investment looks like this year.
I love it. And I mean, we don't have to get into it now, but it is fascinating. The world of influencers itself is maturing and diversifying greatly. And then you have sort of this segment of creators where they may almost be more akin to like a traditional celebrity. And they're creating content, they're entertaining, but they're not there necessarily to engage with their following or to drive purchase behavior. And then you have the true influencers who are almost experts in a certain way and can push cultural, movements and drive maybe sales, right? So,
for sure.
and it forces the industry to think about how do you differentiate a little bit. So,
fascinating.
Yeah, it's a hot space. So let's now go to the flip side, right? And instead of exciting trends, let's think about challenges for a second.
Sure.
And I think it's something we don't talk about often, or not as often as we should, maybe as an industry. But are there what would you say are some of the bigger challenges facing our industry, right? If we could focus our collective attention on addressing some challenges or a challenge, is there something that would be top of mind for you?
Again, I'll sort of say there's two things that I would speak to. One that is more cultural, one that is more kind of like, core marketing. Culturally, I think, we need to keep an eye on talent diversity, and sort of how are we hiring, who are we hiring, how are we providing opportunities. I think that's just so critical from the creative side. It's like diversity behind the camera, in front of the camera. So I think that's one big, I don't even want to call it trend. It's again sort of like table stakes that we need to represent, and I think as a marketing community need to stay focused on. The other is around just being tactical attribution. And again, it was just in a panel where we were talking about sort of where are the blind spots as a marketer. And I think everybody always wants to know what is the return on this investment I'm going to make, and that can't just come through sort of one place. But it's continuing to look at sort of how do you get more complete attribution for the investments that you are making. How do we solve that as a marketing community? I think is around like helping to find common definitions, supporting new technologies. But I think it's something that's going to be top of mind this year and moving forward for all of us.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about the belt tightening and how you're spending money, it becomes that much more important to show that attribution and say, hey, yes, we're a cost center, but we're really a profit center. We're really a growth center, and you need that attribution in order to prove your case. Right?
Definitely.
I love it. Well, thank you so
Awesome.
much, Matt.
Thank you, David.
I appreciate having you here. This is the first in a big series for us around all things retail, all things commerce, all things CPG and D2C. So stay tuned for more.